Thank you, Jason. Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I want to thank Chemular for putting this tremendous educational program together for us. I am part of a team of lawyers and other legal professionals at Troutman that focuses entirely on tobacco and cannabis regulatory compliance. We've been in the tobacco space for almost 25 years, and in cannabis for around 10 years. We provide federal, state, and local advice on compliance relating from licensing and taxation and PACT Act issues as are here today, to FDA pre-market authorization, to marketing, advertising, and promotion compliance, to investigations and enforcement representation. We do this up and down the supply chain, across all the product segments, and across all the states and territories. And we combine our expertise often with other professionals in our law firm of 1,200 lawyers, including our state attorney general practice, to assist clients to navigate what is a patchwork quilt of laws across the country that govern these categories. So this presentation, let's get this going, is going to cover the basics of ensuring compliance with state excise taxes and the PACT Act. So strap on your helmets and fasten your seat belts. It may not sound particularly sexy, but make no mistake, this is where law enforcement and tobacco meet. And the themes we're going to cover today are critical to the success to almost any U.S. tobacco business, at least the medium to long-term success of such a business. Before I move forward together, I want to get us a little blood flowing and see a show of hands. Who here today is employed by a manufacturer? Raise your hand, please. Okay. Distributor or wholesaler? Okay. Retailers? Okay. Service providers and consultants? All right. Anybody here from a government agency? Oh, good. Great. I want to meet you guys later on. That is really helpful. It'll help to tailor my comments. It looks like we have a really good representation across the spectrum here of folks. And so jumping kind of into it, there are, I'm going to first start with state tobacco excise taxes, and there are a wide variety of state excise tax regimes for tobacco products. These laws are going to cover the full gamut of tobacco product types, including traditional tobacco products like cigarettes, cigars, roll your own tobacco, pipe tobacco, smokeless tobacco, and hookah tobacco, as well as they may cover newer types of tobacco products, such as, and particularly nicotine products, such as vapor products, and even modern oral nicotine products, although not always. So when asking if a state excise tax applies to you, and assuming you're a taxpayer, because for you retailers in the room, you may or may not be, you must perform a close study of the state's product definitions. Is the product expressly listed in the statute? Could it be covered by a catch-all phrase if it's not expressly listed, such as a product made from tobacco, or a product containing nicotine, or containing a tobacco substitute? For vapor products, does the state tax both the device and the consumable, or just the consumable? Does the state tax vapor products that use non-tobacco derived nicotine? The need to perform careful analysis is particularly important when dealing with novel products. Consider, for example, heat-not-burn products or nicotine pouches. Is the former a cigarette? Is the latter smokeless tobacco, or is it a tobacco substitute? Some of these issues are issues that are being litigated as we speak. Now, states also vary on the base that they use for the excise tax. Taxes might be imposed by the unit, calculated by the product's weight or by product volume, or based on the value of the product. This is commonly referred to as an ad valorem tax. And within ad valorem taxes, there are a variety of values that might be used, including the wholesale cost or price, the manufacturer's list price or invoice price, or the retail sales price, among others. And some states also provide tax savings for those who receive authorization from FDA to market their products as less harmful than traditional tobacco products like cigarettes. And these are known as modified risk tobacco products, or MRTPs. And as you heard yesterday, obtaining such a designation is an expensive prospect and requires extensive studies and evidence. And to date, very few companies have received these orders, but those that have in certain states will get, half price on their excise taxes, for example. And you see these in certain types of modern oral nicotine products, heat not burn products, and low nicotine cigarettes, among others. So who pays the tax? States differ in this respect. Most are requiring tax payment at the distributor or wholesaler level, but definitions of these terms, distributor, wholesaler, can vary and can be broad enough to cover other types of persons, such as manufacturers producing or shipping products in the state, and retailers making deliveries, including those making delivery sales to consumers in the state. So you have to closely analyze these requirements by state and carefully look at your definitions. A state will typically require the taxpayer to obtain a license and submit monthly tax reports and tax returns. Many, but not all, states require cigarettes to be stamped to demonstrate that the excise tax was paid. For other tobacco products, states may require specific language showing that the tax was paid on receipts, or other types of specific labels indicating the tax was paid. The timing of tax payment may vary and might be required at different points in the supply chain in different states, from the manufacturer to the retailer level. And some states also require that the amount of the tax be passed along to the consumer through additions to the sales price. So, some quick thoughts on best practices in this area. First and foremost, determine if you're a taxpayer. And if you are, then make sure that you have specific staff members at your organization tasked with overseeing compliance in this area with licensing, reporting, collection, and payment requirements. And you heard earlier from Jason that there are ways to support your staff in doing so with third-party consulting services, and in particular with IT solutions. So make sure they're calendaring recurring monthly reporting deadlines, including reminders. Consider conducting an internal audit from time to time to see if you are in fact compliant with or in the states where you sell tobacco products. Do you need a license? Some states require out-of-state manufacturers and distributors and wholesalers to obtain a license, and others do not. It's a good practice to diagram your supply chain by state and match that up with that state's licensing requirements and other requirements. Are you handling tax not paid products appropriately? Some states require taxes to be paid prior to shipment into the state, some of them on arrival and some upon sale. And some states require distributors to obtain tax not paid products directly from the manufacturer. Do you store tax not paid products for future shipments out of state? Well, some states will allow you to do that, and others will require you to pay the tax on that stored product and later seek a refund or credit once you've sold the products out of state. And are the entities in your supply chain appropriately licensed? Do you use third-party service providers, like 3PLs, third-party logistics providers? In those instances, we often see licensing issues with 3PLs who store and distribute tobacco products on behalf of another licensee, like a distributor. And some states have clear licenses available for these types of service providers, and others do not. The owner of products might need to obtain a license for their location, or the third-party service provider may need to obtain the license. With respect to record keeping, maintain proof of compliance, including copies of any regular applications, required applications, licenses, reports, returns, both yours and your customers and service providers. And then, of course, maintain customer licenses, invoices, and bills of lading. And again, these IT-based solutions can help a lot with respect to the immense amount of record keeping that can be required. So moving along to the second topic of this presentation, I want to give you all this brings us to the Prevent All Cigarette Trafficking Act, or PACT Act. And this is actually a federal law that is designed to, or intended to help assist states and localities in collecting excise taxes for specific products and to prevent tax evasion, And it's increasingly become a priority for government agencies concerned about cheap products getting into the hands of underage consumers. So I want to repeat that. It's increasingly become a priority for government agencies. Now, to understand the PACT Act, we should first look at the Jenkins Act, which Congress passed in 1949 to assist states in collecting sales and use taxes on cigarettes. And at that time, the Jenkins Act required that shipments of cigarettes in interstate commerce to anyone other than a licensed distributor be reported to state tobacco tax administrators. And then in 1955, Congress amended the Jenkins Act by adding and editing key definitions and adding requirements to not only report shipments to state tax administrators, but also to register with those administrators. So fast forward to 2010. And in 2010, Congress enacted the PACT Act. And they enacted it to regulate internet and delivery sales of cigarettes and smokeless tobacco, to disincentivize illegal smuggling of such products, to provide government with more enforcement tools to combat tobacco smuggling, to make it more difficult for traffickers of cigarettes and smokeless tobacco to engage in illegal conduct, to increase collections of excise taxes, and to prevent and reduce youth access to inexpensive cigarettes and smokeless tobacco through illegal internet or contraband sales. And this legislation made several key changes to the Jenkins Act, including expanding the coverage of the Jenkins Act requirements to include smokeless tobacco and roll your own tobacco, the latter of which was added to the definition of a cigarette. It added a requirement to register with the U.S. Attorney General, in addition to state tax administrators, and that's been delegated to the ATF, and creating new requirements for delivery sellers. And Congress also amended federal law to prohibit cigarettes and smokeless tobacco from being mailed through the U.S. Postal Service. Now, in 2020, in the middle of the night, Congress enacted the Preventing Online Sales of E-Cigarettes to Children Act by, again, amending the definition of a cigarette to include ENDS, electronic nicotine delivery systems. So let's just kind of roll through what's covered by the PACT Act. And I encourage you to get a copy of my presentation afterwards for these slides, which can look a little bit busy because they literally contain the definitions. But these definitions can be very important. So as I mentioned, it covers cigarettes, which are defined in a very specific way. It's any roll of tobacco wrapped in paper or any substance not containing tobacco, and any roll of tobacco wrapped in any substance containing tobacco, which, because of its appearance, the type of tobacco used in the filler, or its packaging and labeling, is likely to be offered to or purchased by consumers as a cigarette. Now, I mention this not because I want to sadistically bore you with this kind of language, but because the second part of this definition has come up recently in our practice, and we're seeing an interest on behalf of government agencies to apply that second part of the definition to little cigars. So for those of you selling little cigars, you should be aware of that. Of course, it covers roll your own tobacco, which is defined as any tobacco which, because of its appearance, type, packaging, or labeling, is suitable for use and likely to be offered to or purchased by consumers of tobacco for making cigarettes or cigars, or for use as wrappers thereof. And that's incorporated into the definition of cigarette. So for those of you who are selling cigar wraps, you'll want to be mindful of this part of that definition. As I mentioned, electronic cigarettes, electronic nicotine delivery devices, and ENDS components which are defined as shown here, are included within the definition of cigarette. Again, a very particular definition. May or may not apply to the electronic devices that you are selling, and we're happy to talk to you about those nuances. And then it covers smokeless and has covered smokeless tobacco for quite some time with a very particular definition of any finely cut ground, powdered or leaf tobacco or other product containing tobacco that's intended to be placed in the oral or nasal cavity or otherwise consumed without being combusted. Thus far, have not seen that definition applied against nicotine pouches. The PACT Act covers 3 categories of persons. Any person who sells, transfers, or ships for profit cigarettes, roll-your-own tobacco, and smokeless tobacco in interstate commerce, whereby such products are shipped into a state, locality, or Indian country, or who advertises or offers such products for sale, transfer, or shipment. The second category is delivery sellers. And delivery sellers with respect to delivery sales into a specific state or place. The term delivery seller means a person who makes a delivery sale. And note the term delivery sale is defined, and I'm sorry, I moved it forward, good. The delivery sale is defined with reference to, I beg your pardon, bear with me guys. It's defined with reference to, I lost my train, here we go, beg your pardon. It's defined with reference to remote sales of covered products to a consumer. And the term consumer is defined broadly as any person that purchases covered products and does not include manufacturers, distributors, wholesalers, or retailers of covered products, but only if they are lawfully operating. So a consumer is anybody except a manufacturer, distributor, wholesaler, or retailer who is lawfully operating. Okay, and then the third category is common carriers and other delivery services in the context of delivery sales, and so that's like DHL, UPS, FedEx, to the extent that they are offering services in this area, which in 2010 they were, and these days not so much. Now, all these covered persons, whether you're a delivery seller or you're a wholesaler or a manufacturer, you've got to register with ATF. And you can see here on the slide that there's some additional information about this. I will tell you this is a very basic and simple process. And covered persons must also register with the tobacco tax administrators of the state and place into which a shipment, advertisement, or offer is made. Some of these states also require registration with their state attorney general office, not just the tax or revenue departments. And though it's not expressly contemplated in the PACT Act, some states take the position that you need a tobacco license in order to submit PACT Act reports. Now, you have to file monthly PACT Act reports to both the tobacco tax administrators and chief law enforcement officers of each state. The specific forms of the state vary. Some use standardized forms prepared by the Federation of Tax Administrators, and others use their own forms, and others incorporate the PACT Act reporting requirements into other tax reporting forms. That is the sort of thing that a product like iGen might be very helpful with. Let's talk about non-mailability. A lot of folks were interested in this when ends were swept into the PACT Act. And so all of these covered products are non-mailable through the U.S. Postal Service, unless an exception applies. And in general, these exceptions cover the following subjects. They cover cigars, which have a very particular definition. They cover shipments within the non-contiguous states, meaning Hawaii and Alaska. You can get an exception for business or regulatory purposes. You can get exception for shipments between businesses, legally operating businesses that have all applicable state and federal licenses and are engaged in tobacco product manufacturing, distribution, wholesale, export, import, testing, investigation, or research. And to take advantage of this exception, you have to submit an application to the U.S. Postal Service to register every 3 years. There's something called the certain individuals exception, which is also referred to sometimes as the non-commercial purposes exception. And it can be used for non-commercial purposes, including the return of a damaged or unacceptable tobacco product to the manufacturer. This particular exception is subject to weight limitation of 10 ounces per package and a maximum of 10 mailings that can be made by one person using this exception in a 30-day period. There's an exception for consumer testing. That comes with a very particular definition. And there are public health exceptions with respect to agencies of the federal government that are involved in the consumer testing of tobacco products solely for the public health purposes. Delivery sale requirements. So this is particularly important for online retailers, but again, for anyone who is sending product through the distribution system and does not know whether or not the person on the other side receiving that product is operating in compliance with all required laws. So under the PACT Act, all state, local, tribal, other laws applicable to these covered tobacco products will apply to a delivery seller and a delivery sale as if the delivery sale occurred entirely in the jurisdiction where delivery occurred. So if you're an online retailer and you would be inclined to take the position that the laws of a particular state don't apply to you because you don't have presence in that state, that constitutional defense has been taken away from you by the PACT Act. There are special labeling requirements. The bill of lading and shipping package have to bear the statement and label that you see on screen. And yes, you know, when you're someone selling a vape product and you've got to put this on your package, it's not a great thing to have to do, to label it as cigarettes. Shipments are subject to a weight restriction of no more than 10 pounds per delivery. There are very specific age verification requirements, as you can see up here. And in terms of record keeping, you've got to keep a record of every delivery sale for 4 years. And this one may surprise you all. State or local excise taxes, the language says, must be paid prior to delivery. And I wonder who here is doing that. So penalties and enforcement. So for knowing violations of the PACT Act, the federal government can seek criminal penalties of up to 3 years imprisonment or criminal fines or both, as well as seek injunctive relief to restrain violations. For delivery sellers, including those who sell to businesses who are not lawfully operating, as I said earlier, the ATF could seek civil penalties of the greater of $5,000 for their first violation and $10,000 for every violation thereafter. So think about that as every shipment you make in violation of the PACT Act comes with a potential $10,000 bill. State AGs, local government Indian tribes who levy an excise tax can bring or seek injunctive relief and civil penalties, but also tobacco manufacturers that are TTB, tobacco manufacturers, importers, and export proprietors who are TTB licensed can also leverage the PACT Act. So if any of y'all are interested in that aspect of it, come and see us. And then finally, ATF can put non-compliant persons on a non-compliant list, or NCL, and this is distributed to law enforcement and to all wholesalers, to common carriers and delivery services. So if you get put on that list, your product cannot be shipped. My last slide, some of the best practices that I've seen in my practice. First of all, confirm the extent to which you are shipping any of these covered tobacco products in interstate commerce. And if you are, again, make sure you've got the staff that's focused on this. Make sure that they're also calendaring these reporting deadlines And if you're making sales directly to consumers, ensure that you're in compliance with the PACT Act delivery sale requirements. And even if you don't make sales directly to consumers, you need to be performing due diligence to make sure that your customers are lawfully operating. Otherwise, they could be considered consumers under the PACT Act, and your shipment to those customers could subject you to these extra PACT Act requirements for delivery sellers. So at a minimum, make sure your customers are possessing a valid and unexpired license. And then finally, maintain records to show that you've done all this, that you've submitted all required registrations and PACT Act reports, as well as documents that support the duly licensed status of your customers, plus your invoices and bills of lading and all evidence of tax payment. So thanks again for this opportunity to share this information with you, and I'm more than happy to chat about this topic or any other during the convention this week.
Great. We have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions. It's a lot of complicated stuff. As I mentioned, this presentation will be available after. Let me bring this lovely lady the mic.
Hello, Augustine.
Hi, Gay.
Can you speak to some state laws that have essentially extended the PACT Act to categories outside of cigarettes and smokeless? For example, some of the Stake Act-like requirements that almost mimic the PACT Act?
You're right, there are state laws it's a very good point, that there are state laws out there that have similarities to the PACT Act. They will contain information that is similar to, but not always the same as what the PACT Act requires. For example, California will require, in addition to complying with the PACT Act, that you actually pick up the phone and call the consumer to ensure that they were the ones who put that order in. And you're supposed to do that at the end of every day. So there's a very specific statute like that in California. But there are other states that have these statutes. I think, if there's a limitation on them, it would be the constitutional limitation I mentioned earlier. But this is an area where, the states and particularly ATF do coordinate. And so I would not rely on constitutional arguments in this area. But that's a great point. So thank you for that question.
Any other questions for Augustine? Right here.
Yes, I work with a research company that conducts regulatory studies for manufacturers, including actual use studies that involve shipping product. In that situation about the mailing requirements and mailing restrictions, does the compliance with the mailing restrictions flow down from the manufacturer, that the manufacturer is compliant with shipping the products and ensuring compliance, or does the research company itself have to ensure compliance with the same requirements as the one actually doing the product fulfillment?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think the simple answer is that definitely the manufacturer sending you that product has got a compliance requirement. And if you're sort of just receiving it, it would be really incumbent on the manufacturer to make sure that they've got your information and that they've incorporated that information in their application to USPS to be able to get the business-to-business exception that I mentioned earlier.
One more question in the back here.
Yes. What kind of a requirement would be required if someone is shipping the product to an international buyer, say someone who uses a U.S. Shipping company and they were shipping? What should that company be looking for from that supplier he is intended to do business with?
Yeah, that's a great question. From a PACT Act perspective, I have concluded that there isn't really a reporting obligation if it's out of the country, but that may not be something that is adhered to by every state. Okay, the state may have a different opinion of that. We've seen instances where states have said, don't bother to send that information to us. We don't want that paperwork. We've got enough to do. But I would say it would be something that might be prudent to check with the state or states in which that shipment is routing through. The examples that I've seen that in have been relatively straightforward distributions that are not, sort of traveling cross-country type situations. But it's a good question.